Green Rush Revolution. My name is Zeta Seti. We're here live in Las Vegas at the Cannabis Conference, and I'm here with Laurie Parfitt from LKP Impact Consulting. How you doing, Laurie?
I'm great. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing fabulous.
So excited to be here.
Me
Thank
too.
you for talking to me today.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really great for them to bring everybody back together again. I mean, wow, right?
It's
so
been
much
an
fun.
incredible year and a half doing everything by Zoom. We were just talking about the fact this is the first time we've done anything in person in forever.
I know, right? It's really remarkable, and it feels great to be back again with people.
Absolutely.
People are my kind. So tell me about LKP Impact Consulting and what you guys do.
Absolutely. So, I have a, 15-year history in consumer products and was, brought up through that chain of command. And then I actually entered the cannabis industry back in 2019 with Mission Dispensaries, our division of Forefront, where I was the vice president of customer engagement and marketing.
Nice.
Did everything from digital, social, brand, all the way out to, customer support and strategic sourcing. And then as things progressed, I ended up starting my own consulting practice. And I've worked with consumer products companies, but I'm mainly focusing on the cannabis industry now. And I really work on commercial strategy and execution. And what that truly means is that we cover everything from marketing, sales strategy, operations, technology, and finance. So my background in CPG really was very unique. I spanned everything. I started my career in finance, 8 years in finance.
Right.
Then I moved into sales and sales strategy and category management. And then from there, progressed into operations and marketing.
Wow, so that's really amazing because a lot of our audience are new entrepreneurs trying to figure out where their place is in the industry, and you're like a living story of this. So that's really fantastic. Having that background also is really important for this industry to understand those best practices and really just honing in on that. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, so I utilize a lot of the skills I learned in CPG, but what's so interesting is that in this industry, what's great is, in CPG, being a jack of all trades, so having all of those experiences is not always the best thing because most of those big companies really focus on the silos.
Right.
What I love about cannabis is that you really need that background. You need to be able to do finance, sales, operations, marketing to really succeed in this industry.
Absolutely.
And so being able to touch every aspect of the business is what I am truly passionate about. And that's why this is such a great fit for me.
And it fits in your program and your business fits every single license type too as well, right? Is that correct?
Absolutely. I mean, most specifically, I focus on whether it's like the CPG brand model in the cannabis world, so licensing a brand and trying to create a national brand across the country, which I do right now with Union Cannabis Group out of Santa Rosa, California. I'm their fractional chief experience officer. And I work with them to really license the brand across the country and find partnerships and also develop extraction labs and help entrepreneurs and especially social equity candidates
for sure
be able to build up their businesses and be really benefit from an industry that truly has impacted them in a negative way.
Absolutely, yeah.
And then I also I work on the dispensary operation, so really understanding dispensaries and what drives consumers into dispensaries and what keeps them coming back.
So let's talk about what you just mentioned just a minute, like licensing a brand, right? Because we do a lot of that too as well. Because you have a lot of multi-state operators that want to go into other states. You got to find the local partnerships. You got to find it's like a matchmaking session, right?
Absolutely, it is. Oh my gosh, and finding that right match is very difficult.
Right. It's like Tinder for the cannabis industry or something. Right, so for cannabis business owners. But look, I think I'd like to understand a little bit more about that process, and then of course, is it a franchising opportunity in your eyes, or what do you think?
It is. It's a unique franchising opportunity.
Okay, that's
and so it's not like when I think about franchising, I think about the McDonald's franchise model.
Right.
But it's not quite like that because it's a very different operation. And so, to create a national brand in cannabis is very challenging.
Oh yeah.
Because, coming from CPG, I worked for Ragu and Bertolli pasta sauces, and that was legal in every state of the union, and you could produce in one state and ship across the country.
Sure.
You had control over your product quality, you had control over your formulations.
Right.
You had control over the spec. Everything was managed all the way down to the nth degree. When you do this in the cannabis industry and you try to create a national brand, it's much more challenging because you cannot move product across state lines.
Of course, yeah.
And so everything is how you're going to expand is all going to be about who you partner with in every single jurisdiction.
Sure.
And every jurisdiction has different laws,
correct,
different issues that you need to comply with. And so it's really, like you said, about finding that right partner to scale with across the country, and then making sure that as you partner with someone, that you really hone in on your spec and make sure that you, whether you're producing in California or you're producing in Michigan or you're producing in New Jersey, make sure that the product that you get in that brand, whatever state you're in, is the exact same product. So when a customer travels the country and they look, the brand that we work on is Dabstract.
Okay.
When they get Dabstract in Washington and they fly out to Michigan, that it's the same exact product, that they can count on the same spec, the same product quality that they would get no matter where they are.
Building customer loyalty, right? And expectations,
Absolutely.
right? Expectations. Like you walk into the Starbucks, you know what you're getting.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? So that's, I guess, like the paradigm behind it. You need to be able to produce that in other states. I bet that's really complicated.
It's very
well, I bet if you're
complicated.
isolating cannabinoids and you can really hone in on the scientific piece of it, maybe that's a little bit easier. But what about like flower? Like a bunch of growers they're trying to grow flower in one state and scaling by IP in another state. Do you have any suggestions for that?
Again, isn't
that an interesting question?
It actually is. So like with concentrates, edibles, tinctures, topicals.
Right, you got recipes, formulations, and you have that. So you can follow a process and you can actually probably get good, consistent results.
Right, and as long as you have the IP around your process and you have a really specific way of formulating or extracting, then you can really make sure that your product is the same. When it's flower, it's about growing.
Right. Well, I have a lot of in California specifically, actually, a lot of growers are just trying to figure out, okay, scaling by IP, scaling by footprint, you really only have two choices, right? You're either going to be the Marlboro and scale by footprint, or you're going to scale by IP. And a lot, because you can't, shift over state lines or shift product over state lines. Again, like how do these cultivators, from a brand perspective, let's say, produce those same results in another state? Do you see what I mean? Can it be SOPs? Can it be the operations? Can it be intellectual property in that regard to start, and then they just kind of bring in other product selections in terms of strains and variety? I mean, is that something doable?
You would have to. It would have to be based on SOPs, work instructions, and making sure that you have your process, your grow process, very mapped out, and that the strains that you're producing and the terpene profiles that you're looking for are consistent across those jurisdictions, which can be challenging because growing in California is very different than growing in Illinois.
100%.
Because California is all outdoor. In Illinois, it's all about how much canopy we have, and we don't have that much.
Right. Right.
I mean, it's expanding, it's getting there.
Yeah.
But it takes time. I mean, there's flower shortages all over the country at any given point in time.
Yeah, and lots of gluts too as well. Like I was just talking to some folks in Oklahoma, right? And they're just like, it's crazy here. Like there's so many underground grows and unregulated grows that they're cracking down on, and that happens everywhere.
Right.
But at the end of the day, it's kind of like these entrepreneurs spent a lot of money, right, and a lot of time and energy. They need to be able to scale and reach new customers. So if you're in a landlocked, or if you're geographically locked within a state, I guess your profession and you're able to bring people to other states, and that's a really important thing.
Right, and that's the magic of this industry is being able to do that. But what's interesting about what you said is in Oklahoma, like if you have too much product, it's not like other industries where you can resell it outside of your state.
I know, right?
You end up having to almost. This is such a sad thing, is potentially like destroy it, because at a certain point it becomes, your shelf life is gone.
Right, and so what I explained to them, right, which is a very fascinating conversation, was like, listen, okay, so really you want to be focusing a lot on breeding and branding, right? Meaning that section out an isolated place, do some research and development, and start developing strains that either will command a higher price in the marketplace or really like consumers really want it. Or you can take that and then basically take the IP and be able to utilize it across state lines in some fashion or form, right? But at the end of the day, even when federal legalization happens and you can't open up your borders, wouldn't you rather be doing royalty agreements and licensing to all these mass cultivators and getting royalty agreements, or would you rather try to scale by footprint? I'd love to hear your answer on that.
I would say the licensing.
Exactly.
Because with the scale by footprint, that is a very expensive proposition. And so being able to put cultivation facilities in every state, I mean, regardless of like what happens with federal legalization, I think this industry is going to end up like beverage alcohol.
Yeah.
And so I come from beverage alcohol.
Okay.
And in that market, you have open states, you have control states, and you have franchise markets, and it's a three-tier distribution model. And there's challenges about moving stuff around. There's always going to be, unique ways that you have to approach every state and jurisdiction, and that's going to be the same in the cannabis industry. If I had that crystal ball, I would say, look at alcohol. And that's cannabis in 100 years. And so... Right.
But I also want to just point out, like, it's not all doom and gloom
for
like cultivators that want to expand by footprint, because there's collaboration and syndication.
Right, and so then it's going to be still about finding partners and having those operations that are truly scalable.
Right.
But that, if you can figure that out, I would say that's going to be, once federal legalization happens, that's going to be a huge opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, I saw this back before legalization in California, where we're helping groups like in the Emerald Triangle, right up in Humboldt, Mendocino. And the leadership piece to that was very important, because a lot of folks are just multi-generational farmers, impacted by the war on drugs. They didn't, they were just like, we're not doing anything, we're not paying anything, right? But when a leading group came in, they were able to create a master brand and then multiple brands underneath that. So do you see, like, in the future, in terms of like some of these groups that want to collaborate and syndicate, scaling by footprint, is that the appropriate way to go?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, if that's the way you can do it, and you do the brands and the sub-brands, I think that is ideal. At the end of the day, it's all going to be about capturing the mind of the consumer.
Correct.
What engages and inspires the consumer? And right now, we're dealing with a consumer who, for the most part, doesn't know what they want.
Right. And there's so many selections.
They're just getting into the industry. They are saying, okay, I've been medicating with alcohol or with opioids or with shopping or with whatever vice it is that you have. And I'm looking for something new, and I'm looking for something that's going to make me feel a certain way, take the edge off, help me manage my life between work and family and kids and all the things that we have coming at us every day. And so, right now we're all focused on how do we educate that consumer and teach them about all their different key need states, all the different consumption methods, indica sativa hybrid terpene profiles. This is very complex.
It is.
And it's very complex for that consumer. And if you go into dispensaries, most of them they don't know what they want. They'll just tell you, I want edibles. Because that's the easiest, that's the path of least resistance.
Oh, well, it's the path that's going to get you the most high.
Well, it's going to get you the most high, the quickest, and it
lasts the longest.
And it's also the most discreet.
And
it can help fit into your lifestyle more effectively. But there's other methods of consumption that will help you with other need states that you have, such as pain and inflammation, athletic recovery, anxiety. That might be more effective than an edible.
And titration-wise, I mean, if we share a joint together, it's going to affect you differently than it's going to affect me.
Absolutely.
And honing in on that, I mean, you got to test, right? But test it as you go along, just to really see what works for you.
Right. Your endocannabinoid system is going to be different than my endocannabinoid system. And so, what works for you might not work for me at all. And vice versa. And so, what it's going to be incumbent upon for brands is really, how do you engage and inspire that consumer? How do you capture their mind share? How do you create that loyal consumer base who's looking for your brand? And I haven't seen a ton of brands out there who really do a great job with that. I mean, you've got a few that you see across the country, but for the most part, consumers aren't necessarily even, cognizant of them at this point.
Well, honestly, I mean, they're so caught up in a lot of operations, and they're making a lot of money, that they're not really focused on even their brand, right? In terms of like brand expansion, or like, even utilizing services like for yourself or any of that kind of stuff. I mean, these are all new things that are coming about, and quite frankly, it's going to be all about brand at some point.
It will be, and especially once federal legalization happens, it's all going to be about brands.
And we're not even talking about global exports and imports even here either, in other countries that still further need that education and brand penetration and market penetration from these brands that are bringing that across the world.
It's all going to be about whether cannabis operators can build out the right brand strategies. And to be honest, I haven't seen a ton of it. And it's about going back to the basics. And so as a marketer who grew up in CPG, who's your target consumer?
Got to know that.
and really hone in on that target consumer. And I always say that's your bullseye. You go for the most difficult consumer to delight. And then from there, what are those outer rings? And how do you make sure you capture them as you're capturing that target consumer?
Yeah.
And then from there, build out that brand pyramid. Take it from the bottom. Say, okay, how am I like everybody else? How am I different than everybody else?
Sure.
What's my brand promise? What am I promising consumers every time they interact with my brand or my product? What kind of consumer response do I expect from that? And then what is my brand essence? So what is the emotion I want people to feel when they see my brand?
And analyzing, being obsessed with consumers is a very successful path. I mean, obviously some of the biggest entrepreneurs in the world have focused on that, being obsessed with the consumer and what the consumer wants, right? I mean, obviously that's, the market. So in your opinion, what kind of methodologies can entrepreneurs use, or even existing business owners use in that fashion, on how they can be more consumer obsessed?
I think it's really getting into that mind of the consumer and utilizing data available to you to understand what's going on in the marketplace from a macro and micro perspective. What are those key trends? Where are consumers growing? How have we seen things trend differently over the past few years? So even if you look at a few years ago, flower was the biggest part of the industry. Now it's declining.
Very much so.
And all of a sudden you see edibles and tinctures and vaping technology taking more of a foothold.
Well, health trends add to that too as well, like health of plant combusting, plant material, and into that, but go ahead.
Absolutely. And so you see some of those trends. So making sure you stay on those trends, you understand where consumers are going with the product.
Yes.
And then from there, also doing some of that primary consumer research. So whether you are a brand and you have, followers on Instagram and people signed up on your website, utilize your consumers. Find out why they love your brand, why they love your product, why they love your dispensary. And what kinds of things can you do to engage them more? Know your consumer. In consumer products, we do a ton of primary and secondary research to really hone in on that consumer. That's awesome. And really focusing on not just what they tell you, but also doing some of that primary consumer research to really get inside the head of the consumer. Right. What aren't they telling you?
And that brings up a really important question. In the mind of the consumer, do you think that, and I would think you would say yes, but do you think that the transparency of the integrity of the supply chain process on knowing what they're consuming is important?
Absolutely. I think transparency, no matter what industry you're in.
Of course.
Honestly, but that's a huge thing for consumers these days.
It is, isn't it?
So back a few years ago, if we go back to food and beverage, just for a brief second. So in food and beverage, everything, 10 years ago was processed. It was all about mac and cheese in the center store and grocery and getting stuff off the shelf. People weren't into vegetables. Vegetables were not the center of plate. Meat was the center of plate. Meat, fish. That was the main portion of your meal. Okay. Now we've seen this transition where vegetables are now center of plate. Right. Yeah. And shopping the center store is less of a thing, and being on the perimeter is what people are doing more of, because they want that fresh product. Right. And part of what they like about that is they like the transparency. When you look at some of the best brands that have succeeded even in the center store, they list their ingredients on the front of their packaging. Right. But see, talking about packaging and labeling, what you don't see on some of this packaging and labeling in cannabis is harvest dates. You don't see that. You don't see harvest dates. You don't see a lot of the information on how that product was produced. That's what I mean. You don't see the behind the scenes. And what consumers are saying is that they want to see that. They want to know. Oh, yeah. Part of the issue with this industry is it was on the black market for so long, and you heard all of those horror stories about someone lacing your product. Yeah. And those consumers are still there. Now they're engaging in the industry. And paying a higher price too. And they're saying, I want to make sure that I'm getting something pure, that nobody's putting anything in my product, that there's nothing, no additives here that are going to hurt me. It's all about fresh and real. Well, yeah, freshness guaranteed. But what's interesting though is that with the supply chain, especially with the separation of licenses, right? Because when I was first starting, it's like a nonprofit, vertically integrated. If you got a dispensary license, you can grow, you can manufacture. Arizona, very similar, still keeping that paradigm actually. Yep.
And so, but now it's like you got the separation of licenses. And so what you're not seeing is, okay, I got this product in the dispensary, right? And it looks fresh, it looks good, but I really truly don't know like where that came from. Right? I can see the lab test results, but again, I don't know if the lab tests were skewed, you know, and things like that, right? So I'm sure in the consumer's minds, they're sitting there thinking like, okay, so I'm smoking this, I'm ingesting it, I'm putting it into my body. You know, it would be better if I actually maybe knew the grower and looked at his practices, or his or her practices, looked at their operations, make sure they didn't use pesticides, quality control processes. Do you think this is something absolutely important? Is this data analytics that you guys are searching for?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think consumers want to know this.
Right.
They very much want to see, you know, in food and beverage we call it farm to fork. They want
Farm to fork.
Yeah, we want to see that.
Right.
Consumers want to know exactly where it came from. Did it come from, and they also want to know, did it come from a big operator or did it come from like a small cultivator? You know, there's something about the craft side of the business that is really interesting. And so knowing each step of the process and seeing that behind the scenes and knowing where it comes from and how it's put together, I think from a consumer perspective could be really impactful.
Yeah, and also from the cultivator's perspective, because you know a lot of cultivators are very passionate about what they do. You know, they produce these strains, maybe do breeding or whatever, and there's a whole breeding and branding aspect to that. You know, but these cultivators, they're not getting the spotlight dispensaries are.
Well, right. But the truth is that the cultivators are the ones creating the product.
Well, that's what I mean, right? So if we can, I don't, like you said, you don't see a lot of brands, you know, really, you know, going around the United States and doing, you know, what you just said earlier. But I think that's really about, like, these cultivators don't get that kind of exposure, right? And they don't get that kind of credibility for the art that they do, because it is an art, right?
It absolutely, this whole industry is art.
Consumer, I know, consumer to grower, and this is just a delivery vehicle in my opinion, right? But really it's like what happens here is where the magic happens, and the consumers need to know that.
Absolutely. And you know, when I work with brands, I say, like, you guys are the real deal. You have been in this industry forever. You lived on the farm, you did all these things.
Right.
The consumers want to know that. They want to see that you're the real thing.
Right,
They want to know that, like, this is your passion, this is who you are, and this is, you know, you're trying to help people live better lives, and you're going to give them the best, highest quality product, the cleanest product, to make sure that they can do that. Absolutely,
absolutely. So, do you have like 3 maybe key insights you could give our audience, you know, on, you know, pretty much your background in the industry and kind of what, you know, people should be thinking about in terms of brands if they're starting a brand?
So based on my background in the industry and my background in other industries as well, is when you're starting a brand, be very targeted. Know exactly who you're targeting, know exactly what you're looking for, and go very much back to the basics.
Right.
Like I said, approach this like you would approach a brand in any other industry, and really build it up from the bottom, do your consumer research, and make sure that what you're putting out there is what consumers want to see. Then from there, once you have that, and you have that sort of winning secret sauce, you know, make sure that as you're looking at your different marketing vehicles to get it out there and to get consumers aware of what you're doing, make sure that you utilize each of the verticals that are available to you properly. In this industry, you can't do everything like you can in other industries. You can't do TV, you can't do radio.
I know.
But you can do out of home in many states. You can do digital, you know, programmatic banner ads. You can do third-party emails. You can do all of those marketing vehicles. Make sure that you're utilizing them correctly.
Yes.
And make sure that you're honing your message consistently across all of them.
Right. That's a great point. It's like having that singular message that everybody can relate to, and it's the same thing over and over and over again.
And then third, make sure you're original.
Right.
You know, the one thing that I see, and I see it everywhere I go, is all of a sudden, all of these brands will focus on one kind of thing.
I know.
Like, oh, we're going to partner with, you know, with this kind of group, and we're gonna, you know, we're gonna do all of our packaging based on this and our eventing based on this. You know, look at what your competitors are doing. Do a SWOT. Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And really focus on those threats. And really look at what are your competitors truly putting out there, and make sure you don't do the same thing.
Well, get out of your comfortable zone. You know, I mean, really do something different, right? Try to differentiate yourself.
Be original. Don't do what everybody else is doing. there's a bunch of brands in California doing the same thing, and they're maybe only in California and Washington State and Oregon. You know, realize that eventually they're going to scale.
Yep.
And so, as you're thinking about scaling, make sure you go a completely different path.
Yes.
And try something that consumers will resonate with consumers, and they will identify with you. That will create stickiness for your brand.
And brand legacy too, as well.
Exactly.
Yes.
And that's something that you can take across the country, and that will be unique to you.
Right, that's awesome. Laurie, thank you so much for coming on this show. Thank you very much. This is Green Rush Revolution. My name is Zeta Seti, and thanks again. Really appreciate it.